Prime Minister, thank you for your time.
Thanks for yours.
In 2017, you promised real change. Now you're promising stability. You're on track to be re-elected. Is that why you're playing it so safe this election, just sort of tinkering around the edges, appealing to the centrist voters?
Of course, I would completely dispute what you're saying there, but I do agree. What we need right now is certainty and stability, particularly when we're in the midst of a pandemic. Having said that, all of the things that I campaigned on, we have made really excellent progress on as well.
Not quite everything.
Well, yeah, we can go through every individual item if you'd like, but on making sure our rivers are swimmable again, on child poverty, on climate change, and yes, I would even add the progress we've made on housing. I am proud of.
Not as much progress as you would have liked to have made.
Well, look, and we've been open about that, and we had a minister pay a high price for that. But I don't resolve from the fact that in a housing crisis we need to try and do new things, and nor would I ever step away from our record of having built more houses than any government, state houses, since the 1970s.
Yeah, so in 2017, Labor was full of big ideas. Some were simply unrealistic, and you've acknowledged that. You say you have no regrets about pursuing new approaches, new ideas. Where are the big ideas in 2020? Because don't we need them more than ever now?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, one of our plans for addressing the economic crisis that the whole world is in is to use this as an opportunity to build back better. And whether or not that's even redoubling those efforts on our housing builds as we have, our Jobs for the Environment scheme, which has been credited as being a real step change in using this time to create jobs and look after our environment, or the work to become 100% renewable by 2030. Those are all opportunities. But at the same time, let's support our exporters. Let's support our small businesses. Those in themselves can be transformational too.
You've said you're campaigning for a strong mandate. What exactly does that mean? Does that mean you want to become sort of the first government under MMP, the current electoral system, to be able to govern alone?
As you rightly point out, it hasn't happened really in our history.
But let's be realistic. If you look at how Labor is polling, the high 40s, low 50s, it could very well become a reality.
I take nothing for granted, and it would be totally unwise to take anything for granted. We're going to work every day till this election to earn people's support. So I'm not going to assume we'll be in that position.
But what does a strong mandate mean?
Well, it means as many votes as possible in order to really have that certainty for us in the way that we
preferably put you in a position to be able to govern alone.
Voters will decide, Jackson, but I'm not going to make an assumption till that time. We do have a clear plan. It does take a lot of work to manage multiple parties in an arrangement. But voters will decide what happens in that regard.
Can you give me that clear plan in 30 seconds or less?
It's got five. It's got 5 steps. It's all about investing in our people. Jobs, building back better, supporting our exporters and our small businesses.
Overseas voting opens today. The majority of Kiwis living abroad live in Australia. What's your pitch to them?
That if they want to make sure that the country that they have the right to return to at any time has that stability, that certainty as we navigate this pandemic in particular, then to give their support to Labor.
There are more than 600,000 Kiwis living in Australia alone. Do you believe that securing these extra votes could be the difference between being able to govern alone or needing the support of another party?
Oh, look, I see those overseas votes as being critical, but actually just as much so, more so for the fact that people should have their voice heard no matter where they are.
But Labor's even launching a social media campaign specifically targeting overseas voters. So
we always do. I was a list candidate before, when I was first elected, I was a list candidate in London targeting overseas votes. So we always have. In part, that's because Kiwis, if they've stepped foot in New Zealand once in the past 3 years, have a right to vote. So we, therefore, have a responsibility to make sure that they use that right.
Of the 600,000 New Zealanders living in Australia, do you think more will join them because of the economic hit New Zealand has taken from COVID-19? That's what Judith Collins has claimed.
Well, if it's a comparison between New Zealand and Australia, I stand by our response. We haven't seen the same hit that we've seen and projection around unemployment. We got our wage subsidy. We had a 12%
contraction in the June quarter. That's very significant.
One of many measures, Jackson, and I stand by what we've done to save jobs. 1.7 million people supported through the wage subsidy. Of course, our debt looks like it will be lower than Australia, and of course our loss of life But actually, we should really be highlighting the fact that relative to other countries, both New Zealand and Australia have done really well. So rather than that comparison with each other, collectively, I think we've, in our corner of the world, done a good job.
Just back on that comparison, though, longer term, do you think the New Zealand economy is better placed to sort of recover from COVID-19 than Australia is?
No, well, actually, I just think in our own right we're well positioned. We do have different economies. We're more exposed around tourism, international education, but we are both well placed to recover. What I'm focused on is making sure for those New Zealanders who are here that we're giving them all those opportunities, and for those who may return home, that they can see, high-wage, decent jobs available for them.
Those living, just back on those New Zealanders living in Australia, many move across the ditch in pursuit of a better life, to earn a higher wage, to enjoy better weather. But many don't have access to basic services such as welfare payments, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, student loans. Are New Zealanders in Australia getting a raw deal?
Yes. And, we've continued to raise that alongside a number of other issues that we've had concerns over.
You haven't had much. You've publicly pressed the case.
Yeah, I absolutely have. And while we've seen some minor tweaks around the edges, nothing that we would consider substantive. It's not going to stop me from raising it.
Do you admit you're powerless, though? You're not the Australian Prime Minister, you're the New Zealand Prime Minister.
If that somehow is suggesting that we shouldn't raise our voice in this,
I'm not suggesting that. I'm just acknowledging the reality of the situation.
I think New Zealand may take issue with some kind of comparison, saying it's somehow about size. New Zealand's never take kindly to that.
No, I never said it was about size, but this is a matter for Australian sort of politicians to determine.
Well, or we would ask that they have regard for the way that we treat Australians in New Zealand. We've never asked for more than equal fair treatment and consistency, because this was a change in policy on the part of Australians. We haven't done the same in New Zealand because we didn't think it was fair, and we don't think the answer is to simply meet an unfair act with an equally unfair act.
In February, you blasted Scott Morrison over deportation. Do you stand by your comments? Because nothing has changed. The Australian Prime Minister brushed off the remarks. The Home Affairs Minister, Peter Dutton, suggested you were grandstanding ahead of the election.
Well, obviously those statements were made in February. Which will feel like a lifetime ago to everyone, but I absolutely stand by those remarks.
So you still believe the relationship is being tested?
In that regard, yes, I do. We have many strengths, many elements of our relationship that have been proven. Look at Whakaari, White Island, the support that was given on both sides, the support through March 15, but that shouldn't stop us from raising where there's points of tension too.
One of your achievements in office is the passing of a law setting a target of net zero by 2050, although methane is excluded from that specific target.
It has its own target.
It does. Would you encourage Australia to do the same, to set a net zero target for 2050?
We discuss environmental policy, and of course, New Zealand will continue to advocate for every country, regardless of proximity, to do its part on climate change.
Why don't you use your international profile to pressure Australia to commit to a target?
You're the one that's making that assumption that is what I have. I do, however, have those discussions directly with the leaders of many countries around what they're doing in the area of climate change.
Have you told Scott Morrison that he should commit to that target?
We've had domestic conversations. We've had one-on-ones where we have discussed environmental policy, where we have discussed climate change, where we have discussed the Pacific. And I'm sure that we'll keep doing that. Obviously, my responsibility is for New Zealand's policy.
I'm hesitant to do this because I've asked you so many times.
You've never hesitated on anything, as I recall.
Just with regards to the Trans-Tasman bubble, we've been talking about it for 6 or so months now. Yes. Is there any update? Have you spoken to Prime Minister Scott Morrison in recent days?
We actually spoke last night, just to check in, as we do on a semi-regular basis. Obviously, the change in Australia's position is that rather than waiting for all of Australia to be open, it's now looking to a hotspot regime. So obviously a bit of detail to be worked through on Australia's side, but we're open to that. We'll just maintain the same check and test around safety to New Zealand in making those decisions around when and where we'll open up.
So you had this conversation, but no specific progress?
Obviously things are progressing. There could be a chance that Australia could just determine that they're happy with New Zealand's status, and while we work through the way that they will operate their hotspot system, we may have New Zealanders travelling without quarantine on one side. And so things are moving, but again, our test is the same, and that is the safety of New Zealanders.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for yours.